Morning, everyone. It's so good to be here with you this morning. As Toby said, if we haven't met yet, my name is Caleb, and I am on staff here with the youth, and also working in our city center as a chaplain with the schools there. Just to give the briefest of biographies about myself. Also, as Toby said, I was born and raised in Canada. I grew up in a city called Windsor, which is as far south as you can get and still be in the country of Canada. And so I lived there mostly up until I moved here. I'm the second of 5 children in my family, and currently also the only one who's living outside of the country of Canada at this point in time. I'm also someone who has a strong tendency towards being anxious. I don't know if anyone in here can relate, but I often find myself thinking about situations that are out of my control. And whether those are situations to do with work, to do with my finances, to do with my family, to do with my friends, and I find myself taking these situations and just turning them over and over and over in my mind until I get myself caught in this web of worrying. And whenever I'm in one of these moments where I've had a spiral of worrying, if I let somebody else into the way that I'm feeling and I tell them what's going on, one of the most surefire ways that those thoughts aren't going to be going anywhere is if that person then turns to me and responds with something like, "Oh, just don't worry about it," or "Just relax, it's going to be okay." Like, yeah, I guess I didn't think of that before now, but thank you, I appreciate that. And I don't know if you can relate to me on that. I mean, maybe for you, you hear those phrases and they work wonders. If they do, I'm so happy for you, because that's amazing. So with this in mind, I'm not going to stand up here this morning and just tell you not to worry about the things that you've brought in with you today. But what I am going to do is to firstly talk about our worries. Secondly, talk about God's love for us and his power over our worries. And then finally, we'll close by talking about what we can do to learn to trust in him when those worries inevitably come our way once again. But let's start off by just getting into the Bible. If you would just grab a Bible from one of the tables in the middle of the row, or if you want to look at your phone, we're going to go to Luke chapter 12. At the first service, somebody shouted out the page number when they found it in the blue Bibles, and I completely forget the number. So if you find it, shout it out, and everybody can follow along with you. 1045. So 1045, we're reading from Luke chapter 12, verse 22 to 31. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap, they have no storeroom or barn, and yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wild flowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Don't worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well." In these words that we've just read here, Jesus gets at some of the worries that go to the core of our experience as humans. The 2 specific ones that he goes after are about what we will eat and what we'll wear. And it's a part of all of our experience as we eat to sustain ourselves and as we clothe ourselves to protect ourselves from the elements. And I think this is really important for us to see as we start off. Because what Jesus isn't saying is that we don't need to worry about the extra things in life or the luxuries that we might be going after. He's saying that we don't need to worry about even the most basic parts of our survival. And I just want to make a note here, and I'm going to talk more about this later on, but what Jesus isn't saying here is that our survival isn't important. He's not saying that we should just go through life carelessly or that we should not care about the things that are involved in our survival or the basic parts of our life. What he's really getting at is the way that we respond when those become areas of need. And the level of significance that we put into those things. Because if we can learn to trust God and to put our needs into his care with these things, then, which are the most important parts of our life, then we can also learn to trust him in the other areas where we find ourselves worrying as well. If I was to ask you to think about the past week, or even just the past few days potentially, and ask if there was anything that you found yourself worrying about, my guess is that each one of us would probably be able to come up with an answer quite readily. Maybe it was health-related, either for you or for one of your loved ones. Or maybe it had something to do with finances. Maybe something went wrong in the house, and now you've got to figure out how you're going to pay to get that thing fixed. Or if you're a parent, maybe it had something to do with your children, something going on in their lives. If we went around the room and asked people to just give us an answer of what they were worrying about this week, we would get unique answer after unique answer because the possibilities here really are endless. According to the UK's Office for National Statistics, the number of people experiencing anxiety has been on the rise in the last decade. And based on their statistics in this study, as well as in studies like Jonathan Haidt's popular book, The Anxious Generation, what we're seeing now is that Gen Z, who are now nearing their 30s, are more likely to experience anxious thoughts than those generations that came before them. So when Jesus addresses our worries here in this passage in Luke 12, he's addressing a problem that we today are very familiar with. The teaching that he gives isn't only for his first century audience. It's very applicable for us today as well. And I think that so often, the reason that we find ourselves worrying or feeling anxious is that we don't know what's going to happen in some situation. And we also feel as though we don't have the control to determine what it is that will happen in that situation. Before moving to Bristol, I spent the last 4 years working at a camp in Canada, which is called Muskoka Woods. And throughout the year, we would have children between the ages of 6 and 16 come up to camp for anywhere from like 3 days to a few weeks at a time. And we had all kinds of activities that they would do during their time there. We had a massive water slide. We had boats on the water where we could do wake sports. We had a skate park. We had a high ropes course. We had a zip line. But one of my favorite activities that we had at the camp was one called the giant swing. And the giant swing is exactly what it sounds like. It's a giant swing. And it starts off with you being pulled up into the sky by a rope, which is attached to a harness that you're wearing, which is being hauled on the ground by a group of 10 people who are taking off at a full sprint to get you up into the air until you reach a height of about 70 feet in the air, or 20 meters, if that's easier to translate with there. And at this point, you're suspended in the air with nothing but the ground below you. And once you've reached this point, all that you need to do is pull a lever on your harness, which will release you and send you swinging through the air between the two poles that make up the structure. I've seen a lot of people have a go on the giant swing. And because of this, I've also seen the way that people's level of fear, or for our sake here today, worry, increases the higher and higher they get on the swing. A lot of the times it's demonstrated by their hold on the rope getting tighter and tighter the higher they go, and also their screams getting louder and louder the higher they get. As if by holding tighter onto the rope, they'll be able to keep themselves safe when they get up there. And so you get this moment where you get to the highest point in the swing, where the gap between you and the ground is massive. It's 70 feet between you and the ground. And it feels completely counterintuitive to pull a lever that's going to release you through the air, swinging back and forth. But here's the thing. In that moment, keeping a tight hold on the rope and refusing to pull the lever isn't actually increasing your safety at all. Because ever since you were on the ground, you've had a rope that's been attached to your harness in multiple places, which is also attached in multiple places to the swing itself, which has also been tested repeatedly for safety by a team of experts over the past few weeks. But the only way for you to know, for you to find out that all those things are actually keeping you safe is for you to pull the lever and to feel the swing and to feel that it catches you and keeps you safe in that place. And in that moment when you're suspended high up in the air and you pull the lever, it just feels like free fall for a second. But as soon as that rope catches and starts swinging you back and forth, you realize how safe you actually are. And you're free to just enjoy the ride for what it is. As I said earlier, I think that so often the worries that we hold on to are the result of a feeling of uncertainty, which is often linked to a feeling that we're not in control of the outcome of a situation. But what Jesus is saying to us in this passage in Luke 12, and just like the experience of being on the giant swing, is that ultimately this worry that we are not in control is an opportunity for us to trust the one who is in control. It's in that letting go and in that release into trusting that God is in control that we find an experience of faith that is so much greater than any worry that we could have had. Just like that release of the swing, which reassures us of our safety and allows you to enjoy the ride, what Jesus is calling us into in this passage is a release of our worry. Instead, stepping into an experience of knowing that God is in control and freeing us to experience his peace as we let go and as we learn that there's a set of hands holding me and my worries that are so much bigger than mine could ever be. Last month in our youth home groups, we spent an evening talking about peace. And we were reading from Mark chapter 4 together, which is the story where Jesus calms the storm. And the story starts out with Jesus and his disciples getting into a boat and heading out across the lake. And at some point, as they're on their way across the lake, a storm starts up. And it's a storm that's so bad that we read that the boat is nearly swamped. And in fact, it's such a bad storm that we have a group of disciples, a lot of whom were fishermen, so they would have spent their entire lives out at sea. And yet something about this storm has them convinced that they might actually drown in this boat today. And if you know the story, you'll know this already, but where is Jesus? He's asleep. He's sleeping in the back of the boat, and the disciples actually had to go and physically wake him up. And I know there are some people who, something about sleeping inside during a storm is really nice, where like the rain's hitting the window and you feel really like secure and out of the elements in your bed. But I think this might be the first time that I've heard of someone who was so secure in the storm that he was okay with just being out there right in the elements and sleeping right on through it like he did. And as we read this story, and in the days following our home group, I just kept thinking back to Jesus in the boat, sleeping right through the storm. And I pictured the way that he gets up after the disciples go to wake him up. And he just immediately goes and quiets the storm. There's no back and forth with his disciples. There's no questioning of like, what's he going to do? Like we don't even read that he takes a moment to kind of like wake up and figure out, oh, what's going on? Like what am I going to do next? Like he just gets up. He's the picture of calm. He wakes up, he turns towards the storm, and he just quiets it. And the more that I thought about it, the more amazed I was by this picture of Jesus. Because I found myself thinking about my own life and thinking about the way that I can start to worry, or the way that I can start to feel anxious about the things that I've got going on. And I feel that so often in my life, I find myself looking a lot more like the disciples in this story than I do like Jesus. When deadlines pile up, when a financial difficulty comes my way, or when I get some news about something going on with a family member or a friend back home, I find my default reaction looks way more like the disciples, worrying in the boat. And so that brought me to ask the question as I looked at Jesus, why, when I look at him here, do I see someone with such a complete lack of worry? And it's because Jesus, being God himself, knew that he was more powerful than the storm. His lack of worry in this situation came down to the fact that he knew no matter what came his way that day, no matter what threatened his life, no matter what his friends around him were feeling or saying or doing, he could have the confidence of knowing that he was greater than the storm. And so then that made me ask the question of what does that mean for me today? If I look at my life and then I look at Jesus on the boat, and I want so badly to look more like what Jesus looks like in this situation, how can I learn from his example in the story? How can we learn from what he's teaching us in Luke 12, the passage that we read together to open our time today? Jesus didn't only have the confidence to face the storm because he himself was God, but he also had the confidence of knowing just how loved he was and just how valuable he was to God the Father. We read that throughout Jesus' life, when we read the Gospels, we see that he consistently went away to pray. He consistently found these moments to spend time with his Father. He knew him intimately, to the point that he could have this complete confidence in the love that his Father had for him. And so this is what Jesus addresses in Luke 12 when it comes to us and our lives today as well. Because when Jesus draws these comparisons to the birds and the flowers, the reason that he does this is to communicate how valuable each one of us is to God. How loved each and every one of us is by God. And he explicitly says it in verse 24. When he adds this line at the end, he says, "And how much more valuable you are than birds." In the style that Jesus so often takes with his teaching, he's painting a picture here of the birds and the flowers who go without worrying about how they'll be provided for and still consistently find themselves with all the provision that they need. Jesus wanted his audience then, and then through them, he wants us today to be brought back to knowing just how loved we are by God when we're in that place of worrying. And he goes on in his teaching to say this about the physical things that we tend to worry about. He says, "Your Father knows that you need them, but seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well." You see, what Jesus is getting at here in that verse is reordering the way that we respond to our worries. By reordering the place that we go to when we look for security and safety. So often, as we've already talked about here this morning, the source of our worries comes from this feeling that we don't know what's going to happen in a situation. And we feel as though we've lost the ability to control what is going to happen in that situation. And with that feeling, I think that so often we're right. In those situations, we don't have the ability to control what's going to happen. And so Jesus, in reordering our attention, is taking us away from attempting to solve those issues under our own power, in power that we don't have, instead looking back towards the one who has the power to provide. Near the beginning of my talk today, I said that what Jesus isn't trying to get us to do here is to stop caring about our survival. He's not trying to tell us that our lives don't matter and that's why we shouldn't worry. In fact, what he's doing here and what he's saying here goes so much further than that line of thinking ever could. What he's saying is that the reason that we don't need to worry is not because our lives don't matter, but because there's someone so much bigger than the things that we worry about who cares so much about our lives, who cares so deeply about these little things that we find ourselves worrying about, and who loves us enough and values enough to hold on to those things for us. As Jesus says in this passage, God knows what we need. He knows the things that we worry about. But what Jesus also does is call us to seek God's kingdom. He calls us to seek after God, to know God deeper, and in knowing God deeper, to find more and more of his love for us, and more of the heart that he has to care for our needs. There's an author and philosopher named Dallas Willard who wrote a beautiful book called Life Without Lack. And in this book, he takes a dive into the mind-blowing claim of Psalm 23, which says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." And what Dallas Willard says in this book is that the secret to a life without lack is rooted in our knowledge of God. Because as our knowledge of God grows, and as our knowledge of his love grows with it, just as Jesus could have this utmost confidence in his Father's love for him, as we deepen our understanding of who God is and his love for us, we can have that same confidence. We grow in our understanding of just how much we need God, and at the same time, we also grow in our understanding of just how much God has already filled that need. So as we draw towards a close here this morning, I just want to bring us to two practices that we can look at in the week ahead in response to Jesus' teaching in Luke chapter 12. And the first one follows what we just heard from Dallas Willard, that our knowledge of God is the root of knowing just how much he loves us and just how much he cares for us. And so the practice is to open up our Bibles and to see the way that God reveals his love for us through its pages. We could read the Gospels, and we could see these stories of Jesus interacting with everyday people just like you and I. And we could see how in every interaction, his love shines through the pages. Or we can read the Psalms, and we can see the way that God revealed himself to the psalmist as they wrote their prayers through moments of joy, but also through moments of worry, where they found faith in God in the midst of their circumstances. And we can also read through the Old Testament. And through its pages, we can see this love story between God and his people. And how century after century and generation after generation, God was at work pulling his people back towards himself. And I'm not just saying this because it's the expected answer, that we just need to read our Bibles more. I'm saying this because I can't say enough about how much the Bible shows us just how much God is someone that we can trust. In the pages, we'll find God telling us all about himself. And through that, we'll find him telling us about the way he feels about us. We'll read about how sufficient he is to care for us, even in the deepest areas of worry in our lives. And so the second practice that I want to leave with us this morning is to follow the example that Jesus gives us throughout his life of stealing moments to spend time in his Father's presence. Learning his Father's love more and more through each moment they spent together. As I said at the beginning of our time here today, I'm someone who tends to worry a lot. And one of the things that I've found in my life is that the more time I go without intentionally finding time to spend in God's presence, the more I also find myself worrying throughout my days. And I find that as the days go by and as I hear things from home or as I see things happen in work, I find that my worries just build up slowly and slowly and slowly the more time that I go without spending time in God's presence. And I know that for many of us here, we're all in different stages of life. And so for us, our daily and weekly schedule look completely different. And so it'll also look probably completely different when it comes to what it will look like for us to find a moment in God's presence intentionally. I found that for myself, one of the things that's really worked is that I found these moments to wake up a little bit earlier in the morning, to make a cup of coffee, and to sit in God's presence with that cup of coffee. whether it's reading from the Bible or even just sitting still in prayer. I find that in doing that, I can find myself reminded of God's love for me. And I can also find myself reminded of his presence with me. And the fact that his presence will go with me as I go throughout the rest of the day after that as well. But as I said, we all have different sort of rhythms of life in our week and different things that might be opportunities for us to find God's presence. Maybe that would be on the commute to work in the morning. Or maybe it's on the way to or from dropping the kids off in the morning. Or maybe it's just finding a moment before you go to sleep to just steal that moment in God's presence, intentionally finding it and being reminded of his love for us. So we're going to draw to a close now, but as we do that, I just want to ask that you would all stand with me for a moment. And we're going to take a moment here to be still, to intentionally be still in God's presence. And I'm going to read Psalm 46. And as I do this, I would encourage you to close your eyes and to just hear the words of the psalmist. Hear about how powerful God is, how sufficient he is to carry each one of our worries. And as I close, we're going to follow the words of the psalmist, and we're going to take a moment to be still. And in that place, let's be reminded that God is who he is, that he loves us the way that he does, and that in being still before him, we can place our worries into his hands, knowing that in his love for us, he will hold them. So this is Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he's brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and he shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." God, I thank you that you are right here with us. God, I thank you that you love us more than we could ever know and that you care about us more than we could ever know. God, I thank you for the desire that you have to hold on to our worries. God, we thank you that you're not only here with us this morning, but that you'll continue to be with us this week, this month, this year, that every day we can know your presence and know your heart for us. Amen.